Hello, I'm making a very exciting video today. I am talking about my favorite fiction books, and I personally love these works of fiction so much that I'm always eager to discuss them and encourage other people to read them, or if other people have already read them, to have a chat with them. So if you have read any of these books, please talk about them with me in the comments below, or if you're eager to read them, let me know now. But also, I'll be really interested to know some of your favorite fiction books as well. I'm always happy to hear about other people's suggestions. So this is a tag video. The lovely Alex from What Page Are You On? His YouTube channel, he tagged me to do this video, so there are some parameters to it. I feel like I'm voguing here. So these specify that it must be fiction from the 21st century, nothing before that period of time, so in the past 20 years, fiction that has been published. And it also must be non-canonical books, so, obviously, I don't know if you can technically count books from the last 20 years in the canon of literature, but obviously everybody has their own definitions of the canon of literature. So anyway, but yes, and it must all be fiction, and one of the books must connect with the person who tagged you. So I'll go into that a bit later. And I can also only pick 10 books. So I'm only talking about 10 books of fiction here today. Obviously, my list could go on. And obviously making a list like this is slightly stress-inducing because I love my books so much, and to try to choose between them and make an order induces all this anxiety in me, but also it's just a really fun thing to do. But I try not to put too much pressure on myself in terms of like looking back on past lists of my favorite books, or I just sort of did a browse through my bookshelves and the books that stuck with me in my memory in order to pick these 10 books, because if you asked me on another day, I could easily swap them out with several other books that I just sort of recall as my favorite ones. Reading is so subjective in that way, and how what really sticks out in our minds and our memories of what are our favorite books, changes over time as we read new things or reread things, or remember back on certain books we've read. If a scene will just sort of pop up in my mind and, will feel really significant to the particular time. So yeah, so I'm trying not to stress out too much about picking this list of books, and I'm sure it will change over time. So right, to get into it, the very first novel I'm going to talk about is The Master by Colm Toibin. I think that's how you pronounce his name. I've been corrected on how to pronounce his name so many times. It's an Irish name. I'm American. I get these things wrong, even if I'm told very specifically how you should pronounce something. I try to rehearse it, I can still get it wrong over time. So I think it's Colm Toibin. I think that's how you pronounce his name. But anyway, I have loved a lot of his books, but this novel, The Master in particular, I love because it's a sort of fictional reimagining of the life of Henry James, thinking about his sort of intellectual process, but also his emotional life, which we don't know all that much about because his writing wasn't that confessional or autobiographical. He didn't write in his diaries about extremely personal feelings that he had. So yeah, it's more this column sort of guessing at his emotional life, and the way he portrays that, and showing how he was a very guarded person, but also had these strong feelings for other people, like especially about his semi-suppressed homosexuality, is so moving and wonderful. And I thought this novel is incredibly powerful. And I have this very fun thing stuck in this hardback of the edition I have. So this is the first edition when it first came out. I got a copy of it, but I also went to see the author speak alongside Alan Hollinghurst at the South Bank Center on April 20th, 2004, and what an amazing talk that was, because both these authors are so incredible. So yeah, it was really interesting to hear them in conversation with each other. And this was the year that Alan Hollinghurst's novel The Line of Beauty came out, and that was the novel he was discussing alongside Toibin, talking about The Master. And I slightly embarrassed myself at that event. I mean, I've talked in the past about how I've had embarrassing encounters with authors. I made a whole video about that previously, and this was another embarrassing encounter I had because I went up to Hollinghurst to get my copy of The Line of Beauty signed, and I made an observation to him that Toibin's previous novel, The Story of the Night, which is set in Argentina during the 70s and 80s, and is about a socially and politically ambitious young gay man who ingratiates himself with a conservative family and who are very involved in politics. And that's, basically what The Line of Beauty is about, but from an English perspective in the 80s with Margaret Thatcher. And yeah, so I made this observation to him, and he was sort of taken back. He was like, "Oh, yes, I guess they do resemble each other." And I didn't mean it like he was copying Colm Toibin, but I just sort of pointed this out, but he seemed a little bit upset about that, and so yeah, it was a slightly awkward encounter, but yeah, it was lovely meeting Colm Toibin and getting my novel signed by him. So there you go. For Eric. Yay. Now, the next novel I'm going to talk about almost has a slight connection with the first, only in that on the back of the master, there is a blurb endorsing it from Edmund White. And the next novel I'm going to talk about is a novel by Edmund White, which is Fanny, a fiction, which absolutely isn't his most popular or famous novel that he's written, but it's kind of my favorite of his that he's written. I just love the story so much. So this is about two women who are named Frances or Fanny, which is kind of a funny title because in Britain the word Fanny has other connotations. But yeah, so it's about two real historical women named Frances, Frances Trollope and Frances Wright. Now, Frances Trollope was the mother of Anthony Trollope, the famous novelist. And Frances Wright was a radical Scottish feminist of the time. And Frances Wright moved to America to try to found a intentional community. Well, she did found a commune there, and but it didn't go as successfully as she planned or hoped it would be, and as many communes go. And Frances Trollope went to America to visit her, and they were very different personalities, and you get this account from Frances Trollope's perspective of that journey and their relationship with each other and all of her encounters that she had across America. And Frances Trollope wrote an account called The Domestic Manners of Americans, which was a very famous book at that time after it came out. And but yeah, it's just such a wonderful story about these different women's perspective in this historical period, and yeah, I just absolutely adore this novel. And also quite in a fun way, on the inside of this, I have an invitation to the book launch party of that, which took place at the London Review Bookshop in 2003, because I have the wonderful pleasure of being friends with Edmund White, and so I was invited along to the launch of this book, and it was it was such a fun thing to go to. And also I remember from that encounter, Nigella Lawson was there at that book launch because she's friends with Edmund White, and I just remember at the time when it was quite funny how on the other side of the room there was Nigella Lawson, and there was of course a group of people around her, and Edmund leaned over to me at one point and said, "Oh, this terrible reporter has been hounding Nigella all evening long," and I just thought that was quite funny. And yeah, so yeah, it was a really lovely occasion, but more importantly, this is a tremendous novel, and also this novel is dedicated to my absolute favorite author, which is Joyce Carol Oates. So that's another little fun fact about it, which leads me very neatly on to the next book I'm going to talk about, which is The Gravedigger's Daughter by Joyce Carol Oates. And you know that there had to be a Joyce Carol Oates book amongst this list of my favorite fiction. And it's, of course, just in Joyce Carol Oates herself, it's very difficult to decide which book to pick because she's written so many tremendous books of fiction in the past 20 years. So yeah, it's really difficult to choose, but I think I would have to pick this novel because I think it's an extraordinary, wonderful, enjoyable reading experience. But also it so, as I've talked about in the past, it so encapsulates, I think, a lot of Joyce Carol Oates' major themes and her style of writing that it's really an example of her main style that she writes in, though she writes in so many different styles and formats and about so many different subjects. But yeah, it's about a woman who is the daughter of an immigrant family to America, and it was a very personal novel for Joyce Carol Oates because it was based very loosely on the life of her own beloved grandmother, and so yeah, it's about this immigrant girl's life who has a very tragic family experience early on in her life, and she's the only surviving member of her family, and she just has to go on and sort of make her own life for herself. And and the way she relates that story of this girl who could have been, very easily snuffed out, but who goes on to succeed in many different ways, but also encounters a huge array of challenges along the way, is so emotional and moving, and really says something about, I think the progress of America and the American dream and all of these big subject matters as well. And and I think this is such a wonderful book. So I really treasure and enjoy this novel so much. Next is Half a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And this is such an extraordinary novel. So it's set in Nigeria in the 1960s during the Biafran War, and the novel focuses mainly on three different characters. One, a poor boy from the local community, and also a middle-class woman, and also an intellectual Englishman who moves to Nigeria. And so yeah, it tells the story of this period of time and this conflict through these different perspectives. And I get such an amazing sense of the history, but also the competing opinions and the real difficulties that contributed to this enormous conflict. And so yeah, and this was a period of time that I didn't really know much about before reading this novel. So I found it a very educational experience, but also a completely immersive journey of these individuals' lives. And this novel is one of the rare places in my sort of collection of books that I actually have two editions of this novel. Like I try to keep so much space for so many books that I rarely keep two copies of novels, but I have this first edition of the novel, which is absolutely beautiful, but also I have this special edition that Fourth Estate published when they published the collected works of Adichie, and so yeah, it's just fun having these two different editions of the novel. But also this was a winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction, and when they had a celebration to pick the best of, I think it was the best out of the past decade of the Women's Prize winners, this was selected as the top novel from that list. So, it's had a lot of critical acclaim. Obviously, she's a brilliant writer. When is she going to write another novel? I keep waiting for her to write another novel. It's been many years, and she's such a wonderful writer. So I'm looking forward to that, hopefully one day soon. Send Me by Patrick Ryan. This was published in 2006, and I just adored this novel so much. It's basically a collection of interconnected short stories, but it is classified as a novel because it's all about the same family. And as I've talked about in the past, I think books of interconnected short stories are kind of my favorite to read because it gives such a fully rounded perspective on events and different characters. And so this is about a family a couple who divorce and their three children, and it follows the lives of their three children through many years, and different stories focus on different of the children's lives, and so through these different perspectives, you get an idea of what happened in their family and the divisions of within the family, but also different alliances within the family, and just this. It's this wonderful portrait of family life, from which is so sympathetic and warm-hearted, but also, looking at the harder, grittier side of family life and how we can so often have this strife in our families, which divide us apart and can mean that we lose touch with each other sometimes, but then how there are other connections which are long-lasting and very important and nurturing. And it's just such a wonderful book that has lasted with me for so long, through all of these years, and it's an extraordinary novel, and I hope more people will continue to read it and enjoy it and discuss it. Next, I have How to Be Both by Ali Smith, and like with Joyce Carol Oates, it's very difficult to choose between these authors' many works of fiction, which I would pick as my favorite from the past 20 years. But for Ali Smith, I almost wanted to pick her novel Artful, but I think I would have to go with How to Be Both. So this is a novel in two different parts, one about an individual from the 1460s and then about an individual from the 1960s, and how there's a piece of art which sort of connects them. And this novel, in case you don't know, had a sort of tricksy format in that it was the first edition of this novel was published two different ways, so that in some editions you get the first part first, and then in another edition you get the second part first. So depending on which edition you happen to get, you might get a slightly different reading experience of reading the historical period part first or the more up-to-date period part first. So the edition I got the historical part first, and so that's how I first read this novel. But it'd be really interesting to go back and reread it now the other way around and see if that sort of changes my experience of it. But of course, it was many years ago that I first read this novel, so I'm sure my experience would be different of it anyway. But that's sort of, if you haven't read Ali Smith, this sort of contributes to the reading experience, where she's kind of tricksy in this way, in the way that she plays with language and form, but also tells these absolutely engrossing, wonderful stories, which are about our current times, but also looking back on the history of language, on the history of art, very much in this case. And they're such enthralling tales where the voices of these characters come through and come alive and make it such a vibrant, wonderful reading experience that I just fall in love with their books every time I start reading them. So obviously I could also pick the seasonal quartet, as Alex did in his video when he was talking about Ali Smith. But I adore this novel so much, and I think it's so wonderful. And it's another winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction, so I sort of hope that it will become a timeless classic. Next, I have another tricksy work of fiction, and that's the novel Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. Now, before I'd read this novel, I'd never read I'd read some of George Saunders' short stories, and I just didn't really get along with them all that much, though I think I'd probably feel differently now if I went back and reread some of them or read more of them. But I started reading this and just absolutely fell in love with this novel, whose structure is very difficult to describe, in that it's partly a play but partly a nonfiction account, in that he includes some nonfiction entries of people giving testimonies from the time, but then other testimonies he makes up and are works of fiction, and they're all mingled together and you don't really know which is which. But also mainly it's the story of Abraham Lincoln, whose young son died from disease, and how his mourning process for him. And on one evening he goes to a graveyard to visit his son's grave and is in the process of mourning from him. So you get this very personal story, but also it's a picture and depiction of America at that time and the larger politics that were going on and the enormous political pressure that Lincoln was obviously under. And so it gives such a different perspective of that period and all of the issues involved with that historical period of time. And but yeah, it's also a fantastical tale in that in the graveyard there are a number of ghosts which are sort of moving around and interacting with each other and all have their own different issues going on in their afterlives. And yeah, so it is such an amazing, crazy, wild tale, but it somehow all works together, or at least it did for me personally. I know it didn't work for everyone, but yeah, obviously it was very critically acclaimed as well. It won the Booker Prize in the year that it was published, and I got George Saunders to sign the novel for me, and it was very fun. And his signature, I don't know if you can see, he drew a peace sign that was hanging off from his signature with arms and legs, and so yeah, that was quite fun. But yeah, I absolutely love this novel, and I keep meaning to read more of his books, but yeah, I haven't got around to any of them yet. Then there is the novel Mrs. Engels by Gavin McCrea, and I do know it is McCrea, not McCrea, as I originally pronounced it when I first read this novel. I talked about how I have problems with Irish names, but I was corrected. It is McCrea, not McCrea. And this is the story of Lizzie Burns, who was the longtime mistress of Frederick Engels, the famous philosopher and political philosopher and one of the founders of Marxism. And it's about their time together and their life and how they never married up until the very end of Lizzie Burns' life. And so it follows her journey and her how she was a member of the working class from Irish stock who met Engels and had an affair with him, and actually her sister first had an affair with him, which is super interesting and juicy and juicy story, and then she had a long-term affair with him, and how the class conflict between these two, how Frederick Engels came from a wealthy, privileged family and how she was from the working class. And so there are different opinions and outlooks on life. How obviously Engels, founder of Marxism, was had this idea about how social classes and the working classes worked, but she was actually a member from the working class. So yeah, it gives a really interesting political perspective, but also it's a very personal story about love and relationships, and the meaning of relationships and how relationships manifest in different forms, built on all of these factors to do with class and social privilege and money and all of that. And yeah, which is so interesting, so fascinating, but also a very moving personal story. So I love this novel so much, and I wanted to point it out especially because Gavin McCrea has his second novel out, hopefully will be published next year. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Then I have a book of short stories, Dinosaur on Other Planets by Danielle McLaughlin, or you might pronounce it Danielle McLaughlin. I think Irish people pronounce it Danielle, but anyway, yeah, sorry, I don't always get it right. But this is a collection of short stories, and like I said, and they're, of course, stories on a whole range of subjects, but focus on some different families or relationships, and through different periods of recent Irish life. And the way she writes is so beautiful and insightful, and it's almost philosophical in its thoughtfulness, but also, it's the emotional tug of these stories just completely drew me into them. This is the only book of short fiction that I'm talking about, but I think each story is so well crafted and beautiful and memorable that I think it absolutely has a place on my favorite books of fiction from the past 20 years. And I think it's absolutely extraordinary collection that I hope more people read. And like with McCrea, McLaughlin has her debut novel coming out next year. Hopefully, fingers crossed. It's due to be published, but as the way this year has been going, publication schedules have been getting pushed back and all of that. But yeah, I really hope that it's going to be published next year because I can't wait to read a full-length novel from her. And she is also an acclaimed writer. She was the winner of the Wyndham Campbell Prize for Fiction, which is one of the wealthiest book prizes in the world. So yeah, I was so happy when she won that. And I was very privileged and happy to be at the ceremony when it was announced that she was the winner. And it was such a wonderful moment and experience. And then finally, I have the huge novel Ducks Newburyport by Lucy Ellmann. And I've talked so much about this novel in the past year since it was published. I made a whole review video about it and also baked cinnamon buns because the protagonist of this novel is a keen baker and, well, runs her own home business where she bakes a lot for local community and individuals. And yeah, so Alex also talked about this novel in his list of books. And I would say this is absolutely probably my favorite book definitely from the past year, if not maybe the past 10 or 20 years, because it is so extraordinary. There's so much in it about our current times, but also is this incredible depiction of a woman's life who lives in the middle of America and who is stressing about all of the current issues that we're facing in the world today and how these are all running through her head at the same time as all of the personal issues and conflicts and ideas and thoughts and that she's having at this time in her life. And you just get it all meshed together, but it just blends into this amazing portrayal of our current times and in an individual's life and her family life and says so much. I've gone on about this book so much. I can't wait to read more of Lucy Ellmann's fiction because she's published a few novels previously. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to that and hopefully to what she publishes next. So those are some of my favorite books of fiction from the past 20 years. Here they all are. There's a lot of blue in the spines and the covers of these books. So I tried to match my jumper to that. So, I try to coordinate. But yeah, like I said, let me know if you've read any of these books or if you're interested in reading any of these books now. And definitely let me know some of your favorite books of fiction in the comments below. We can have a chat about them. It'd be really lovely. But thank you for watching. I'll speak to you again soon. Bye.